Buenos nachos and welcome back to the channel. On today's episode we're going to be working on this Xbox right here that a customer has sent in for repair. So let's go ahead and see what it's doing. Go ahead and plug this bastage in and of course hitting that power. It's dead. Let's go ahead and open this Xbox up and see what's going on. Let's go ahead and get our screwdriver and some bits. Alright, make sure we're in reverse. It's almost like opening up a Christmas present every time you get one of these Xboxes because you never know what's going to be wrong. At least, not always. It'd be like your aunt or your mom buying you a Christmas present and you always get clothes. It's like, man, they always give me clothes. So is it always a leaky capacitor causing trace issues? Well, let's find out. Probably ought to cover this up, not safe for work. It's a little dusty in here, but that's not going to be the cause of our issue. Guess we'll get this IDE cable out of the way first. Gotta say, unplugging the Molex connector for the power supply for the hard drive is by far my least favorite thing to do with these consoles because it requires the pliers unless you have like finger grip strength that can kill. I think I've just about had enough coffee, or the right amount, because we're just the right amount of jittery. So we do indeed have a couple of capacitors that look like they're pretty much at the end of their rope. Let's go ahead and bring over this micronoscope and show you what we mean. So if you take a quick look here, it would appear that this capacitor has started to leak. This one too. And these are domed, and that one was probably leaking as well. That one looks fine. Let's go ahead and zoom in using the bigger camera so you can see where these capacitors are located exactly. This is how the console looks inside. Quite dusty. This console definitely needs some TLC. And there are the capacitors in question. Now the question is, are those the capacitors preventing the console from booting up? Let's go ahead and make sure we get our standby from the Xbox power supply first. So for this particular segment of the video, we're going to bring out our multimeter. I advise you do not do this at home if you do not know what you're doing, because I'm not responsible if you delete yourself, catch yourself on fire, or burn your house down. So we're going to be going into DC mode. So this looks like this is a 1.6 console. Get back in here. There we go. So this is a 1.6 console. You're going to be checking your standby on this side of the power connector, and of course these red wires are standby, at least most of them are. We'll go ahead and plug it in and begin the probing. So we are plugged in and we do not have standby at all here, or here, or here. One more red over here to try. And we do not have standby there either. It's almost looking like we don't have any voltages, period. So apparently we have no voltages at all coming out of the power supply. That could be for a veritable assortment of reasons, like a failed fuse, which is an open fuse. This would be the first time I'd seen it, but it could be the capacitors that have actually failed. Now if you take a look at the power supply, the capacitors are in visually good condition. However, looks can be deceiving. We're going to go ahead and check a couple things on the power supply before we progress any further. So now let's go ahead and unplug this thing. And our next portion of the video, we're going to have to take this power supply out of circuit so we can see what it's doing. So we have 2 screws to remove. And it looks like this is the infamous Samsung Tuscany power supply, which many people swear by as being the best. And I do like this power supply. It is a great power supply for the later Xboxes. So here is our guy right here. Let's go ahead and begin by checking the fuse. So we'll go ahead and zoom in on the back over here. So this should be it right here. All right, so we'll go ahead and go into homage mode. And we have a dead short. So that means the fuse is good. I'd say a shorted fuse is a good fuse, but I've heard some people complain that that is actually misleading and makes people think it's a bad thing to have a shorted fuse. So I'm not going to use that nomenclature. The power connector is not cracked. I don't know what would be causing the problems then at this point. We can go ahead and probe a couple of spots on this power supply and see if perhaps maybe a diode or something is shorted, but I'm thinking everything is fine. So we're going to switch over to beep mode and we're just going to check a couple of random components. So we'll start off with the diodes on this side right here. Remember, a shorted diode is of course a bad diode, and just to confirm I am in beep mode. That's fine. This one is also doing pretty good. Have a couple more over here. You're not going to be able to see this one, but there is a Zener diode right there. Also in decent shape. We have a couple more over here on this side. Nothing, 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 nothing. How about these three guys? One of them has to be bad, right? Nope. Nope, and no. There are a couple of components, but I think it's kind of safe to say that we don't really have shorts because I have seen these fail, and when they fail, we would have already seen a couple of components that would have burned. So this one is also fine. So at this point, I don't think we have a component that is shorted that's causing this power supply not to function. So we may indeed actually have a faulty power supply, which could be due to capacitors. One thing we can do to verify that the power supply is, of course, the issue is to swap it out with another power supply, and we'll see if this console will boot. And due to the magic of video editing, I have a power supply right here I can use. Of course, obviously, I have like a plethora of spare parts for the Xbox, so when you've been doing this for a million years, you'll build up an assortment of spare parts as well. All right, so let's go ahead and power on this console. I guess we'll go ahead and hold this power supply in place. Remember, don't be doing this at home if you don't know what you're doing. So let's go ahead and power this on. So it is indeed the power supply causing our no power issues. That's amazing. I was about ready to say we have no video, but that's because I've not plugged in the AV cable. And there we are. These capacitors are in pretty rough shape. They're not the worst I've ever seen, though. We've seen an Executor Xbox that I disassembled in one of the videos in the past, and that one, most of the capacitors were split open at the X mark right there, and it was still functioning. So that goes to show you that these Xboxes are quite resilient beasts. So at this point, we can confirm that the Samsung Tuscany has some kind of an issue with it. First thing we can try, which is the simplest, is to replace the capacitors on it. So let's go ahead and do that next. So I'm going to go ahead and set this to the side, and we're going to go ahead and begin by recapping this thing. First things first, you're going to need to discharge the capacitors before you start working on this thing. And well, it didn't seem like it had power, but we're going to go ahead and make sure that it doesn't. So in my previous video where I was repairing a Samsung Tuscany power supply, or I think I was recapping it, I was using this capacitor discharger, but you can also use this one, which is a little bit cheaper. I think it's like $5 or something on AliExpress, also known as AliExpress. I don't have another weird name to add to that, so we'll just continue. So what I would recommend you do is you start off with these giant ones right here. So I do not know the orientation. I think this is going to be one of them. So you saw that little flash, didn't you? The little red light. That meant it had power, but it no longer has power. And then we have another one right here. We have capacitors on the standby area. Of course, this console had no standby, but that doesn't mean anything. All right, I think that'll do it. Just do this one more time right here to make sure. As far as energy-wise, getting shocked by a capacitor probably will take care of you just as well as a good old-fashioned cup of coffee. So let's begin by desoldering these two ginormo capacitors right here. And they are, in fact, glued in with some special glue, which if you've seen once again in my previous repair video, I did use some of this stuff. You could purchase it once again on AliExpress. We're gonna need to dislodge these capacitors, so I'm just gonna kinda wiggle them with my gazpacho tool right here. And that should be good enough to remove. And I'm gonna need some good old-fashioned solder, and we're gonna get this vacuum hose going. All right, so we're gonna desolder this ginormo one right here. Probably want to lower my temperature down. Somebody has set it to 450. These are fairly sensitive boards and you don't really want to go too high. I'll set it at 350, but if I encounter some issues, we'll go ahead and lower it down to 330. And just one leg at a time. If you're using the spatula soldering iron tip, you could probably do both legs at the same time. So much easier than recapping an actual Xbox motherboard. Wow. Those suck. So let's go ahead and clean up these soldering points with some desoldering wick. So our choice of capacitors today for this power supply will be this one right here. These capacitors have been sourced from Console 5, and I do trust their capacitors because I've never had a problem, and they do choose high quality capacitors, at least as of making this video. Probably shouldn't say that, but I am saying it. Maybe one day we'll go ahead and stock some high quality capacitors for power supply repair as well. And just for reference, in case you're wondering, this is a Samsung Tuscany power supply PSCD101301A Revision K. And if you're finding this video helpful or useful, please remember to leave us a like and subscribe. And thanks for watching. It's like, whoa, you usually say that that at the end. That doesn't mean I won't still say it at the end. And make sure you pay attention to polarity on these things, because you do not want these giant capacitors to explode. Ooh, I'm pretty sure I put it in correctly, but we'll go ahead and check. Yep, that is negative, negative, and then this one, of course, was negative. Remember, you just fold over the legs like this. Now we'll go ahead and progress to removing these capacitors. And, oof, man, there's some tiny ones right in here. All right, I guess we'll do those next. Jeez. Let's see if I can even find the points that I can pull these out. Alright, so many of you have already seen me recap a power supply before. If not, you can go ahead and check out our Samsung Tuscany power supply repair video right over here. We're going to go ahead and skip ahead until the end and see whether our capacitor replacement has indeed changed the symptom of this console. So we finished recapping the Samsung Tuscany power supply, and we're now ready to go ahead and swap out the Delta power supply that's in this console. Reconnect this. All right. Go ahead and get our cables going. Won't grab that Ethernet by mistake this time. All right. It's still dead. So the recapping didn't take care of the issue with this power supply. I wonder what it could be. We'll go ahead and perform a couple of diagnostics while it's powered on. Maybe we can find a clue or something that'll help us. The one thing that I want to note is that I did indeed find a 22 UF 50 volt that was low capacitance, and it had a very high ESR, so perhaps this is a clue. For now, let's go ahead and go into DC mode on our multimeter and see if we can find anything. Plug into our ground, and let's go ahead and probe a couple of these voltages. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and check our big filter caps, which of course are those 200 volt, 330 UF. It says it's 64 volts on one and 61 on the other. That's very interesting. Wonder why that would be. So we're getting 60 volts on these, which is very strange. I was expecting like 167 on these. I suppose I could have performed these tests before I started working on this thing, but I didn't think we were going to actually encounter a legitimate power supply failure. I thought this was going to be a capacitor issue. Well, at this point in time, we're unfortunately going to have to give the customer a Delta power supply. We'll, of course, recap it and then finish off recapping their console, which is in desperate need of a recapping. If you have an idea as to what may be causing an issue with this Samsung power supply, you can leave it down in the comments down below, and maybe we'll revisit this power supply in a later video. Anyway, if you found this video helpful or useful, please remember to leave us a like and subscribe, and thanks for watching. Until next time.